This evening, before I go any further, first and foremost, I need to thank, question? What do moose sound like? Probably a little bit like me right now, except hoarser. But this guy over here is going to be able to tell you. All right? That's a good question. Glad you made it tonight. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my board of directors for their support. And we just have an incredible board that works to no end. And volunteers don't get paid because the work they do is priceless. That's something that I learned down. So anyway, I'd also like to thank our continued members. Some of you have been members since our inception in 2006. And faithfully renewed your membership each and every year. And we do need money to operate because we have dues to pay and fees to Secretary of State, so on and so forth. And to put on programs like this doesn't cost anything. But we do accept donations, and there will be a can coming around, and there's one on the table, and we would really appreciate anything that you could give. Also, at your chairs, there should be a brochure that we just had printed up. There should be a membership form, and also there should be a calendar of events. We started a speaker series where every other month at our monthly meetings, every other month we have a speaker. So you want to keep posted on that. We've had the Audubon do live birds of prey. Someone asked me tonight, do we have a live moose? I don't think so, not tonight. But we were going to have Peter Brasidas at our September meeting speak on reptiles and how reptiles can affect the landscape of a town. So that's on September 27th, our next speakers meeting. All right. I'd like to now take some time to, after our guest speaker, we have refreshments. And also, you can look at these maps that we have, Hartland. And we also have our photo exhibit, The Wonders of Hartland. Take some time and please look at that. Well, this evening's, our guest speaker is wildlife and deer biologist with the DEP, Andy Labonte, who's been with the DEP since 1998. Now, I didn't happen to have Andy's bio. Somehow I didn't get it, but I heard that he is currently researching focus on population dynamics of urban deer and moose and with the human dimension of wildlife management. Now, I don't know what an urban deer or moose is, but maybe they're the ones that, if you see a moose that has a baseball cap turned on backwards, it's probably an urban moose. So anyway, I think Andy is currently working in a master's program in Yukon for wildlife management. Is that correct? Andy works at the Franklin, over in Franklin, Connecticut, where the DEP has a station over there, similar to the one in Sessions Woods in Burlington. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andy Labonte, who is our guest speaker and the topic on moose.
I'll start out by hopefully answering this young gentleman's question right here, if there's batteries in this. I'll let you push one of these buttons, then you can hear what he says. Is that good for it? Yeah, you can hang on. Just don't play until after this. now that we got the first question out of the way, let's see where I'm going to stand. Folks going to be able to see all right if I'm standing here? I got to kind of operate the computer. Is there any way we can shut the lights off? Can we shut the lights off at all? Or? There you go. You'll see a little better. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a great crowd. I hope you are excited about the talk and enjoy the talk, and hopefully I can entertain you and educate you at the same time. So tonight we're going to talk about moose in Connecticut, the history, status, and future expectations. As you mentioned, my name is Andrew Labonte. I'm a DEP wildlife biologist, and I work on deer and moose in Connecticut. I saw a little pamphlet that came out, so I put together these pre-test questions that I'll test you on all at the end of the presentation, so make sure you keep track of the answers. First question was, why have moose recently moved to Connecticut? Do you know why Hartland is perfect for moose? Where was the first cow-calf sighting in Connecticut? How many moose currently reside in Connecticut? What time of day are moose most active? And what makes a rutting male act aggressively? What should you do if you encounter a moose? What's more unpredictable, a cow and a calf or a rutting bull? And how can I keep moose away from my home? Which I'm not sure too many want to keep them away from home, but it was a question.
How do you attract them to your home?
That's probably the answer, or the question I was probably expecting more. I'm going to start off by giving a little description about moose, and most of you probably here in Hartland are pretty familiar with moose in this particular area of the state. But for those of you who haven't seen a moose or don't know much about them, there's 7 different subspecies throughout the northern hemisphere. They're the largest mammal in the northeast. They can stand 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weigh upwards of 1,400 pounds. They can run 35 miles an hour, so don't try to outrun a moose. Surprisingly, they can live upwards of 20 years. Not likely a fair amount of them do live that long, but they can live up to 20 years. And they have a home range size, or a general area that they utilize for all their resource needs of about 10 square miles. As far as reproduction, moose are relatively individualistic. That means they have really limited social interaction with one another, except for cows with calves. And occasionally you will see males in a group with cows and calves, but a lot of times they'll just hang out on their own with other males. And females can breed as young as yearlings, and that's in relatively good habitat, so most of the time, most Connecticut moose probably don't breed until they're 2 years of age. They typically give birth to a single calf, or in excellent conditions, they might give birth to twins. And breeding typically occurs between September and October, and therefore the gestation period, which is 8 months long, calves are typically born between May and June. As far as the moose's diet goes, they're considered generalist browsers, and they need to consume 40 to 60 pounds of food a day in order to meet their requirements. And year-round, they're consuming trees and shrubs or any other kind of leafy material. And during spring and summer, a lot of times you'll find them feeding in aquatic areas because they prefer the sodium that's found in those aquatic plants. And it also provides an area for them to cool off when it's hot out. I kind of noted these little answers to the questions with the little moose sign here. So those are kind of the ones you want to pay particular attention to as I'm going through if you want the answers. So a running bull. Running bull is obviously going to be a male, and during that breeding season, it's going to have elevated levels of testosterone. And just like humans, males can get pretty unpredictable. Testosterone levels get pretty high. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, cows with calves are females, and from my personal experience, they can be pretty unpredictable as well. And which is more likely a risk is a cow with a calf, because they have those calves, in May and June, and they're not weaned until sometime in September. So for that whole several month period, they're really protective of those calves. So they are more unpredictable than males. The other question was, what happens if you encounter a moose? Well, don't get between the cow and the calf. If a cow has a calf, you really want to try to keep your distance and don't get yourself in a situation where you're going to get between the two. And if you do, make sure you put a large object in between you and the animal, just to protect yourself. Keep your distance initially if you can. Move slowly. Take pictures, obviously, so you can document the sighting. And for the DEP's purpose, we like to record all sightings from the public and from hunters. So if you do see a moose, I know a lot of it's pretty common up here, so it's not quite as frequently reported, but call a DEP office or post it on the website, which is an easier, more convenient way to do it, and you don't have to talk to anybody directly. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the population constraints for moose. And the number one constraint probably is brain and lungworm, which brainworm is carried by deer, and it's excreted when they go to the bathroom. Snails get on the feces, and then by accident, moose, while they're feeding on other vegetation, ingest these snails, and then get these brain worms, which affect the spinal column and the brain. And for deer, it's not really much of an issue because they've grown with it. It's part of their daily lives. It doesn't affect them to the point of where it causes any kind of mortality or any side effect, except in rare cases. So, but brainworm in moose has a different effect. You'll see them walking in circles, acting kind of crazy, and eventually can lead to death. Another significant thing is climate change. Moose are really prone to heat stress, especially during spring when they have their winter coat on still. And if it was a spring like this year where temperatures were extremely high compared to normal, that's going to have a pretty good impact on the moose, especially the younger ones that don't have quite those fat reserves built up. So heat stress is another common factor, especially here in Connecticut. Like with any species, habitat loss is going to be a big concern. Competition with deer. In certain states, harvesting or over-harvesting of moose. In other areas in the northern climates, predation is going to be a big factor. And finally, being worked to death by some of those guys in Maine, I guess, who tame these moose. Historical distributions of moose in North America essentially were associated with glacial epochs and the presence of boreal forest. And as the glaciers receded, moose populations generally tended to move northward. The distribution in North America, there's 4 different subspecies found. In the east, there's the eastern moose, which is shown here in pink, which is what we have here in Connecticut. In the Canadian provinces, there's the northwestern moose. In Alaska, there's the Alaskan moose. And over in the western U.S., there's the Shiraz moose. Now, moose in northern New England were relatively abundant in the 1600s in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. But they declined in the 1800s due to habitat loss and unregulated hunting. In the 1970s, the abandonment of agriculture and changes in forest practices allowed for the regeneration of forest stands, which provided ideal habitat for deer and moose. And the lack of predators and restricted hunting in the late 1900s allowed for these moose populations to increase substantially. To allow for the use of a natural resource, regulated hunting seasons were established in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and their current population exceeds 40,000 moose. Now, these increasing moose populations in northern New England expanded southward into Massachusetts and Connecticut. Because we had no moose here, we still had relatively good habitat for them. So they essentially filled that gap where they had been extirpated for several hundred years. Now in Massachusetts, they were believed to have been extirpated in the 1800s. They had increasing reports since the 1980s, and they currently believe they have a population somewhere between 800 and 1,800 moose. And that population continues to grow. But currently they don't have any hunting season. In Connecticut, there was really few historical accounts that moose ever existed here. Some of the old historical maps show them in the northwest corner of the state, but very few reports, and there is no archaeological findings that indicate moose were here. But if they did exist, it was in relatively low numbers. Now these moose from the northern states began showing up in Connecticut in the late 1980s. And we call these transient moose. They're young, dispersing moose that are moving off to find their own habitat and own home range. And really at that time, the DEP had options of really euthanizing them or relocating them out of state, because the state of Connecticut is relatively urban for moose being here. They move such a large area and move over such a large space in a short period of time. We have a lot of vehicle traffic. So the concern was there's going to be a lot of health risk and human risk as far as motor vehicle accidents. But in 2003, there was a ban on the movement of cervix due to chronic wasting disease, which is a disease that affects deer and elk and moose. So the state was no longer allowed to move moose out of the state. So we're really left with local relocations. Now, in order to document the establishment and expansion of moose here in the state, we began keeping track of public sightings of moose and moose vehicle accidents in 1992. During that first 8-year period, which we consider the establishment period, we averaged about 6 sightings a year. Those sightings occurred in 30 different towns throughout the state. And over that next 10-year period, which we consider the growth period, we're averaging about 53 sightings a year. And those sightings occur in 83 different towns. Next, we look at the frequency of moose vehicle accidents. The first moose vehicle accident occurred in 1995. And up until 2002, we averaged about 2 every other year. Since 2002, we've been averaging 2 a year, and in 2007, we had a total of 4 moose vehicle accidents, and an additional 2 moose were dispatched due to public safety concerns. The distribution of those moose vehicle accidents has mainly occurred in northern Connecticut, about 89%, and the town of Hartland has the greatest number, which I believe is 4. There were 3 moose vehicle accidents that have occurred in southern Connecticut. There was 1 accident that occurred in 1998 in the town of Westbrook, 1 in 2007 in New Canaan, and 1 in 2009 in Danbury. So really the concern is the movement patterns of these dispersing and transient moose. And this slide here is just going to show you some of the patterns of these transient moose throughout the years. The moose that got hit in Westbrook in 1998, based on public sightings alone, this moose was documented throughout towns in eastern Connecticut until it ended up on Route 95 where it was hit by a car. And that was a female moose. In 2001, same public sightings. The moose ended up in Hartford, just along the river by the intersections of 84 and 91. And fortunately for that moose, which is a male, at the time we were able to capture it and relocate it to New York. In 2004, We had a moose follow a similar pattern as that one from back in 1998, where it traveled through eastern Connecticut and ended up in Old Lyme. I guess they like the shoreline. That's what we've come to believe. And in 2007, somewhere along the 84 corridor, the moose moved southward and ended up in New Canaan. And unfortunately for that moose, it was struck by a vehicle. These moose have been traveling anywhere from 5 to 10 miles a day, so if you think of the type of distance that moose can cover in a short period of time and how many roads it crosses, it's obviously going to be a pretty good public safety concern. Now, one of the most interesting things was that moose that was struck, or that moose that ended up in Old Lyme in 2004 was actually radio collared in Massachusetts. It was captured in Clinton, Mass. on June 5th of 2004. It was relocated 30 miles north to Winchester, Mass. And 3 weeks later, it was sighted just north of the Connecticut border. And over the next 17 days, it traveled through eastern Connecticut until it ended up in Old Lyme. That's 100 miles in 5 weeks, where it spent the next 2 weeks in Old Lyme before we were actually able to capture it. Then we brought it up to you folks. And I believe several people in the audience had mentioned that they had a photograph of a collared moose hanging out with other moose, and that was the one that was captured and relocated. And nobody's really had any sightings of it recently, so I'm guessing something must have happened to it. But that's where it ended up. So as I mentioned, we really have concern about public safety. And the concern being that moose are really active during dusk and dawn period. And the problem is that they're such dark color, when you're driving on the roads at night, your headlights don't really pick them up, and by the time they do, it's probably too late. And because the moose stands 6 feet tall, a lot of times it's going to end up going through your windshield. And this motor vehicle, which ironically the person was from New Hampshire, ended up striking the moose on the Merritt Parkway at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the person supposedly passed away a week later from severe injuries. This is just some other shots of some different moose vehicle accidents that have occurred. The one on the bottom right, where the moose is sitting in the passenger seat, actually happened in Massachusetts. So we know we have these transient moose moving around through the state of Connecticut, but we really wanted to confirm the presence of a resident moose population. And in order to do that, we really needed to have a cattle with calves sighted in the state, and that would kind of confirm that we do have a breeding population of moose here, and it's not just moose that are moving in and out of the state. So the first evidence of a calf was in 1998. A female moose was found dead, and alongside of that was a small set of tracks indicating that it probably had a calf, but the calf wasn't seen. But in 2000, we had the first sighting of a cow with a calf here in Hartland. And those green shaded towns are all the ones that have had calf sightings, and all the black circles are the ones that are individual sightings. We've had 65 different individual calf sightings in 17 different towns since 1998. And as you can see, obviously, the town of Hartland is pretty much peppered with calf sightings and has the most of any town. So I believe, as the shirt states, Hartland is the moose capital of Connecticut. I think the fire department had one of those shirts at one time. So why is Hartland such great moose habitat? Well, originally it obviously borders Massachusetts, which has a growing moose population. So all the moose that are coming out of Massachusetts, the first place they're going to end up is along the Connecticut border there, and Hartland being a town with a large forested tract of land throughout most of the town, and a large amount of active timber harvesting, that really provides the ideal habitat for moose. When you got to consume 40 to 60 pounds of food a day, you really want to maximize your consumption by feeding on a lot of those small stems and those regenerating areas, such as along the reservoir. Another way we can document the presence of moose here in Connecticut was through deer hunter surveys. And in 1996, we began collecting information from hunters. But just to give you a heads up, we only receive about 10% of reports from sightings, or 10% of the hunters respond to these surveys. So we're probably missing a fair amount of sightings, but as a general, we're just using it kind of as a trend. During the first 4 years, we averaged about 21 sightings. And those sightings occurred in 31 different towns throughout the state. And if you saw a map side by side with the public sightings, they match up pretty well. Over the next 10-year period, we've been averaging about 35 sightings a year. And those sightings occurred in 62 different towns throughout the state. And I'll just kind of, all the shaded towns are ones that have moose sightings, and you kind of just, can see the numbers up there. The lighter is 96 to 2009, and the darker shade is just 2009 sightings. The towns of Hartland, Colebrook, and Barkhamsted, and Union, which have those black dots, have had moose sightings for the last 11 or 13 years. So in those towns there, we're pretty much sure there's a well-established moose population. In 2008, we developed a population estimate based on these public sightings and hunter sightings. And this is just a minimum population estimate. If a moose was sighted in Hartland, here at this intersection that's closest by, and then a week later there was another moose sighted there, we eliminated those duplicate sightings. If they were both female sightings, we just considered it one moose. So we put a 10-mile buffer around all sightings, and any one that overlapped we eliminated. So this is really a minimum population estimate. We came up with 32 adult cows, 32 adult bulls, and 9 calves, which surprisingly has a equal sex distribution. And then what we did, we used that information to model the population, to see how the population potentially was going to grow in the next 20 years. And we used recruitment rate data, sex ratios, and mortality rates from other studies, and some from the information that we collected here in Connecticut. In that first 5-year period, the population was expected to grow about 24%. As it stands now, we have a population of probably close to 91 moose. 10 years, they grow about 70%, or have a total of 124 moose. After 15 years, we got 140% growth, total population of 176. And 20 years out, we could expect a population somewhere around 250 moose. Now, another factor that we didn't consider on that moose modeling was really what kind of suitable habitat do we have here in Connecticut, and what are the temperature limitations based on some previous research that's been done. We know at a certain temperature threshold, moose begin panting. It really affects their ability to eat enough food to get them through the year. So we did some habitat modeling with some temperature restrictions, and I don't know how well you can see the information, but the areas that are white, we considered unsuitable. Essentially, that Hartford corridor, Fairfield County, I think it's Middlesex County, those areas are kind of, we said, all right, the human population is probably too high to really sustain any kind of moose, and there's really limited habitat there, so we're going to call that unsuitable. But as far as the rest of the state goes, any of the areas in gray were considered poor habitat, and they had poor summer and winter temperatures. And then any of the areas in the light green were considered moderate habitat with poor summer and winter temperatures. The darker green was moderate habitat with moderate summer and winter temperatures. And the darkest green was moderate habitat with suitable summer and winter temperatures. And one of the factors that goes into this model was that it was done by county. And unfortunately, the town of Hartland and Granby all fall into Hartford County. So it really lowers the habitat suitability model for this population. So we know that that dark green box, which is up there in the top left-hand side, probably is really extended over quite a bit further into Hartland and Barkhamsted, but that's just a limitation of the model. So Connecticut, based on this, really has a potential to support upwards of 2,500 moose. And the expectations that we'll ever have a population like that is pretty low. Vermont only has about 4,000 moose, and they got a lot more habitat than we do here in Connecticut with a lot less human development. So the expectations we'll ever see that is pretty unlikely. So what's the future of moose here in Connecticut? Back in 2007, we came up with a cooperative moose research project between the Connecticut DEP, the University of Connecticut, the Northeast Wildlife Damage Management Cooperative, and the University of Massachusetts. And as part of that project, that's where I'm involved as a master's student at UConn working on this project. And because it's co-sponsored by the DEP, it's kind of a collaborative effort where I can work on both aspects of it. So what are the project objectives that we came up with? We wanted to document the establishment, expansion, and distribution of moose in Connecticut, and that's going to be an ongoing project. We also wanted to look at movements, habitat use, and causes of mortality, and again, that's pretty much ongoing. We also developed a public and hunter perception survey to find out what they thought about moose and moose management, and that's essentially wrapping up right now. We also wanted to develop a better population estimate and better predict future population growth, and that's more or less complete. And we also wanted to assess what the management needs are going to be here in Connecticut if this moose population continues to grow. So to look at the movements, habitat use, and causes of mortality, our objective was to capture 10 to 15 moose and put GPS radio collars and ear tags on them. And then that would also help us better develop population estimates, because if we re-observed a collared moose, we would know that obviously if we saw moose number 2, and not a tag moose, we would be able to differentiate between the two. But before we had any tags on there, it could be the same moose and you wouldn't know the difference. So in 2007 is when we began this project, and unfortunately due to some issues with the manufacturer, we really didn't get started till late March. But we conducted aerial surveys using helicopters and tried to locate from there moose on the ground to immobilize them. As I mentioned, we got a late start, and during that time, because it was late March, capture conditions are really marginal, and it was limited snow cover. And if you really want to make the most of it, you want to go out there with complete snow cover, so you can really pick up the moose that has a nice black color off the white snow. So in that first year, we observed one moose on 3 of 4 different flights. So we saw a total of 3 moose, all were males. And we really didn't have any capture attempts because they were far enough away where you couldn't really get to them. And at that time, we weren't really interested in capturing the males. We were trying to capture females. In 2008, we observed moose on 3 of 4 occasions. 2 of those were bulls, and we observed a cow with a calf on multiple occasions. And again, we tried to go in there on the ground, and one of these locations where the cow with calf was is down 174. What's that intersection over here? 179. And we tried to go in there on foot with a large crew and try to move the moose with a helicopter, and they were so smart they just turned around and beat feet out of there. So amazing how fast they can move when they're scared. So we had no success that year. In 2009, we decided we were going to switch it up, and we were going to try to shoot the moose from the air out of the helicopter. And that year we observed moose on 5 or 6 occasions. We saw 3 bulls, 3 cows, and 3 calves. As the picture shows here, we ended up capturing an 800-pound bull on the Barkhamsted Hartland line over on the west side of the reservoir. We also captured a 450-pound female calf up here in Hartland. And we were fortunate enough to pick up this moose that was down in Southwood, which turned out to be a 700-pound yearling bull. In 2010, unfortunately, we had some additional collar issues from the manufacturer, and we were only able to get out 2 times to locate moose. During that first occasion, I observed a bull and an antlerless moose, and we were able to capture the bull, which was about 800 pounds here in Hartland. And then on the second flight, we observed a marked moose, which was unfortunately the one from the previous year, so we weren't able to capture anything. So we did get 1 moose in 2010. Just to give you an idea of some of these movements with the moose that we had collared, I'll start with the pink one. That was the initial capture site down at the far end of the screen. We captured that right there on the Hartland-Barkhamsted line. And that moose moved a maximum of about 9 miles north and spent a lot of time between there and Massachusetts. And it never went south of where we actually captured it. All those little pink dots scattered throughout the map are all its locations. And the GPS collar set up to download a location every 3 hours. It doesn't always pick it up if there's a lot of overstory. A lot of times it will miss the location, but I believe there's about 900 locations on that map. Next is the light blue, the calf female, and that was captured up there on the west side of the reservoir. And unfortunately, we only were able to monitor that for a few months. Sometime in late May, we were out there, we downloaded the data, and then the following week, there was a sighting on Stillman Road of the moose heading north, and we've yet to be able to find it again. We've flown several times throughout Massachusetts and haven't been able to pick it up. And unfortunately, the problem with the collars are they can malfunction a lot, so the moose could still be around and we just can't find it, or it could have moved so far north, even beyond Massachusetts. It could have gone to New Hampshire for all we know. We're just not able to pick up the range of the collar. And then lastly is the adult bull that we just recently captured. Captured it in the same spot as the calf from the previous year. And that moose has pretty much been staying in that general area and just north of there into Massachusetts. I think they summer in Connecticut and winter in Mass because they always seem to go north, but that's just my assessment so far. Just to give you a rough idea of some of the information we gleaned from the public and hunter perception surveys, we asked them, all the people that responded to the survey, how many moose they thought existed in the state. And a fair number of them believed that less than 100 moose existed in the state. That's both the homeowner and the hunter survey, which is pretty close to what we believe. We then asked them about the status of the moose population, and 50% or more believed the population was increasing, and that's on par for what our belief is. But there was a large number of people that had no opinion about what the population was doing, and that's probably just based on their lack of exposure or lack of experience with moose. The survey for the public was all the towns in the top 3 towns in Connecticut, so top 3 towns downward all the way across from east to west. So you got some of the people obviously in Enfield and some of those areas where they're not going to even have any exposure, have never seen a moose, probably don't think there's any moose in the state and don't really care. Then we asked what their opinion of the moose population was, and again, there was a large percentage of the population that really had no opinion, whether the population was too high or too low. And we asked them what activities would they participate in if there was a good moose population. And obviously the biggest one would be watching moose. More than half of homeowners and about a third of hunters would be interested in watching moose. And obviously hunters would be interested in hunting moose. We found that 15% of homeowners and 20% of hunters had reported observing a moose in Connecticut, which is relatively high compared to what we had anticipated. 67% of homeowners weren't concerned about encountering a moose or damage caused to the ecosystem or to their property. And 69% of homeowners had some concern with being involved in a motor vehicle accident that involved a moose, which is a legitimate concern. So what are the future expectations of moose here in Connecticut? We're going to continue to document public and hunter sightings and moose vehicle accidents. We're going to finalize the analysis from the resident and hunter surveys. We're going to continue efforts to capture and call a moose. And we're going to use the information to develop a more precise moose population model. And hopefully all this information will finally help us to evaluate our management options and management needs. So getting back to your moose test, I have the responses here, but I'll ask the folks for the answers. Why have moose recently moved into Connecticut? Very good. Yeah, they migrated from the north. There's increasing northerly populations, and Connecticut has the available habitat for moose to occupy. And this moose was just recently seen in Simsbury in this lady's garden. Do you know why Hartland is perfect for moose?
Nice people.
Yeah, it borders Massachusetts, and I heard several people talk about the forest and active timber cutting. So, you know, it's a large forested landscape over here in the northwest with a lot of timber harvest, and that's just ideal habitat for moose. Where was the first cow-calf sighting in Connecticut? That's an easy one. All right. How many moose currently reside in Connecticut?
75.
Yeah, between 70 and 100. Yeah, that's a good answer, yep. What time of day are moose most active? Dusk to dawn? What makes a running male act aggressively? And obviously this one is not acting so aggressively. It's recovering from the mobilization drugs, but I didn't really have a good picture to put in there. Testosterone. What should you do if you encounter a moose?
Run.
Now, based on the expression on Paul Rigo, who's the bear biologist's face, I wouldn't ask him what you should do when you encounter a moose. Nor would I ask Jason, because he's got a pretty big smile on his face. You don't want to get between the cow and the calf, keep your distance, put an object between you, move slowly. And like I said, we're trying to document these sightings, so take pictures, report it on the DEP website, or give us a phone call and notify us that you've seen a moose. What's more unpredictable, a cow or a calf, or a running bull? I wouldn't want to get in front of either one of them, but because the cow or the calf has more responsibilities for a longer period of time, she's more protective of that calf, so you really don't want to get between her and that youngster. And how can I keep moose away from my house? I had a tough time coming up with the answer to this one, but I think I finally found it. Don't give a moose a muffin. Because he'll want some jam, and when he's done, he'll want another muffin. That's a kid's book that I read to my 4-year-old, so I need to throw that in there for a little comedy. So at this point, I'm going to flip on a little video that we put together that shows some of the moose capture, which was kind of rolling when some people were walking in. And at that time, I'll just take any questions that you folks have from the audience. have any questions while I'm throwing this on there?
Yeah. You mentioned unfavorable summer and winter conditions or temperatures. I can see the summer being hot. What's unfavorable in the winter?
In the wintertime, it's the same thing. Because temperatures are relatively high here in Connecticut, we don't have that much snowpack. There might be more over here in the western side of the state, but all in all, it's pretty limited, and temperatures are pretty warm, especially coming into that fall period where animals are more stressed out because they've been exhibiting a lot of activity during the rut. They're a lot more emaciated, they don't have the fat reserves, and when the temperatures get really high, they begin to pant, and they look for areas of cover, such as conifers, and that's not the greatest habitat for them to be feeding in. So they have a trade-off where they seek cover in denser, thick conifers, or move into areas where they can feed and get that 40 to 60 pounds a day requirement. So it's the same kind of trade-off during that spring period and summer period where they're either eating or laying in dense cover to stay cool.
How does the other large land around the bears and deer and so forth, how does that affect the moose population? Is there more moose or there less deer?
Typically where moose and deer overlap, there's obviously some competition for food resources, but moose obviously can browse a heck of a lot higher than a deer. So really the limiting factor is going to be the interaction with the brainworm. And they say where there's a high number of deer, where deer densities are high, it's going to have a greater impact on the moose population. So there's typically not a lot of moose where there's a lot of deer.
What about the bears?
And as far as, I heard somebody else asked about the bear. As far as bears go, there's probably little impact from the bear population. It's possible that bears are taking a few calves, but it's unlikely. It's just not that dense a bear population. I mean, in Hartland there's obviously a lot of bears, but throughout the rest of the state, it's pretty minimal.
What would you say is the resident moose population in Hartland?
It's tough to say, but I mean, I saw 9 different moose in that 1 year, and that was during the winter time. And then we went out in the fall to try to capture some moose, and we saw an additional cow and a calf and bull. So an additional 3 moose that we probably hadn't seen previously. So I mean, right there is probably 12 moose that we physically saw. But they move around such great distances. It's really tough to say because Hartland and the next town up in Massachusetts, that's really the same moose. You can see the collared moose that we had spent a lot of time over the border in Mass. So it's hard to put a specific number just in Hartland.
Are all moose that you relocate collared?
Are they all collared?
If you're relocating these collared?
Initially, they weren't collared. Anything that we captured and handled now, we're trying to put a collar on it. And up front here, I got some moose booklets. Those are old from 2002, and I'm working on revising that currently. And the set of antlers that are over here, you folks are welcome to come up when you're all done with questions, but this set of antlers, this is from the moose here in Hartland. It's a matching set, and this is from the moose that we captured in 2010. There's a couple of moose skulls up here. There's a cow skull, a young bull skull, and unfortunately this is one that was captured and relocated up here to Hartland from Southbury, and somebody found it up in Massachusetts about 6 miles away sometime in December, lying in the middle of a creek or in the middle of a stream. So we're not really sure what the cause of death was. Unfortunately, it had been scavenged by coyotes. These are the radio collars that we're putting on the moose. They cost about $4,000 a piece. They're not cheap. So these are expensive moose you got here in Hartland. But the feature is that you don't have to go out there on a daily basis and find them. This collar right here picks up locations from the satellite and stores them on the collar, and then periodically we can go out there and remotely download all the information to the laptop, which is better than some of the other older VHF collars where in order to find the moose or get a location, you had to physically be out there looking for it all the time. And because these moose, like I said, can move upwards of 10 miles in a short period of time, it's difficult to drive around when there's not a lot of roads to begin with up here, trying to figure out where the moose is.
How about predation with a large population of coyotes in the wintertime?
Yeah, the coyotes have minimal impact. They're probably taking less than a bear is taking. Really, the only predation as far as mammals like that go would be wolves, and that's in Minnesota and the Canadian provinces. Around here, a coyote's probably not going to take down even a calf after a couple days old. It's going to be able to move around good enough, and that cow's going to protect it unless something happens to her.
Have you put a radio collar on a moose?
Yeah, we put a couple on them. All these pictures right here are ones that we've captured in the last couple of years.
One of your pictures showed a man standing with a moose kind of rubbing up on his shoulder.
Yeah, that was me.
That was you?
Yeah,
What was
that was before I shaved and lost like 40 pounds.
Well, what was the story behind
That moose is really bizarre. We had captured it. It was when I was flying in the helicopter. I'd seen two moose, and one of them had a broken leg. It was right up by Route 20. And earlier in the year, there was a moose that got struck by a motor vehicle right there in that same section. And that moose could have been the cow of that calf that was struck. So it could have been an early weaned calf that had the mother struck by a car, and that other moose that had the broken leg could have been there when that other one was hit. So it was difficult to say, but we're not really sure. But when we gave it the reversal, I said, let's go on the other side of the stream so the moose doesn't go in the water. And instead it followed us and went right in the water. And then it continued to follow us down the road until Paul Rito, the bear guy, actually ran into the woods and like hid behind a tree and turned around and ran back and finally evaded it. But it walked right up to us and followed us through the woods for probably a quarter mile. You know, for whatever reason, we're not sure. At the end of this video, I think it's the last part of it, shows it following us through the woods.
Do they like Phragmites or blue stripe?
The thing that they seem to feed on quite frequently is the striped maple and red maples. And the moose that we captured in 2010, while I was flying over it, it was actually stripping a staghorn sumac. So apparently they like sumac too. But typically you find the striped maple, an area with good striped maple, a lot of times all it's broken off with browse from moose.
We find a lot, we're out deer hunting late in the fall, we find where they break the trees with their teeth.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not cognizant of what that is.
Yep.
You know, if it's a deer, you're going to find everything on the snow, on the ground, scrapings. So where there's a moose, there's nothing. They eat everything.
Yeah, they a lot of times they'll just scrape up the young bark with their teeth. That's almost what they call like a last resort. That's when you typically don't see that if there's good habitat or a lot of good browse out there. You won't see that kind of teeth scraping on the trees. So during some years, maybe they do it more than others, but it's pretty apparent here in Connecticut, indicating that even though we have a large amount of regenerating forest, it's really not enough where it's going to support a large moose population.
How many tags are the moose allowed to have? How many tags?
We put one tag in each year. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Yep.
And the collar?
Yep, so we put one radio collar on them, and that collar is supposed to last 2 years. Unfortunately, the first moose that we captured, Yeah, there it is. The first moose that we captured, the collar stayed on it for about a year, and then it malfunctioned and fell off. So they're supposed to stay on there for 2 years and collect data, but we put one collar and 2 ear tags in them.
What's the best website to go to for more information on your project in particular?
You can go on the Connecticut DEP website, and that's where the majority of the information is. There's nothing on the Yukon website, I don't think.
And then you have your website up there also?
Oh, just Connecticut DEP is the website to go on.
Does any home gardens attract moose or anything like that?
What's that?
Any home gardens?
Apparently that one in Simsbury must have had something that was attractive. Yeah, they're really mostly attracted to, browse, not so much. I really wasn't sure what to expect when I did that. It was kind of concerning. Here I am with a gun in my hand and a moose is walking up to me. Apparently he's brave. At that point, he was still somewhat under the drugs, so he was, he followed us after that, though, after he went down. And I got one more little short thing that I can show you, too, while you're asking questions. And unfortunately, because of the equipment limitations, you have to be 30 to 40 yards from the moose, and it was just kind of out of range, so we just watched it for a while until it got really agitated, and then it ran off. But we were hiding behind the tree, like I said, put a tree between you and the animal. Anybody else have questions about this?
My husband saw a young moose on Route 20.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that there was a parent in the woods on either side of it watching it?
When did they see it?
He would have seen it in the early spring.
Typically, if it was a younger moose, I'm guessing it was probably a yearling from the previous year. And that during the springtime, the cow will actually kick the yearlings out, so they go find their own range, their own home range. So a lot of times, at this time of year, a lot of yearlings moving around. So if it was in the springtime, it probably was one, from the previous year, and it was just on its own. They'll kind of get abandoned.
He didn't seem, my husband said he seemed to be like, he didn't have any idea,
Yeah, they're young
and watched
Yeah, they're kind of young and, not very aware of their surroundings. Right now, there's 2 moose, at least we think there's 2 different moose that ended up going from Ellington, traveled to Tallinn, Bolton, Hebron, Colchester, and it's been hanging out in Colchester for like the last month. And then another one popped up in Portland. So those aren't exactly what you call moosey areas, but they're 2 young moose, if they're 2 separate ones, that are hanging out down there.
I saw a young moose on Lost Acres Road 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
I was coming up with my truck in the trailer, and I saw this. It looked so narrow. And I stopped. And he turned, and I thought, oh my God, that's a moose. He just turned around and trotted down the side of the road, and stopped, and then went over the bank into the swamp. I didn't know where to report it. Now I do.
Yep, yeah. If there's a piece of paper and you want to jot it down, I'll put it in the records as far as the sighting. Or if you can log on to the DEP website at any time and report it. It has the date and time and location right there. So this here was a pretty good sized bull. When we first captured it, it didn't have any antlers, so we didn't really know how big it was. But the cow that was with it, and I don't think there's any volume on here, but he's making a lot of grunt noises at us, and he's licking his chops. Yeah, he's not real happy that we're there. So me and the other kid that's videotaping it were pretty concerned. We didn't know if he was going to charge us or just sit there, and eventually he wandered off. But definitely my heart rate was much higher.
Have you actually been charged?
No, I've never been charged. That was probably the closest encounter we had physically on the ground, because most of the work we've been doing is starting them from the helicopter. So by the time we get to them, they're already immobilized. We went in on this one on another occasion, and I don't know if it's on this end of this tape or not, where we actually observed the male mating with the female on 2 different occasions, and then we used the calf call that this young man has in his hand, or at least he did have, to call the cow over to us, and they walked right in front of us, and we darted her, and unfortunately she ran off with the dart and never went down. But that was probably the most exciting time that we had. It was interesting to see, and never anticipate ever seeing a moose, mating with another moose. Yep. Sure, hit the calf button. You might have to turn it on. So we used that calf call, and the cow came right over within 20 yards in front of us, and the bull, and then I darted her. So I don't know, I think that video is on here at the end.
You always carry the guns with you just in case there's that danger.
No, we never, other than the dart gun.
That's a dart gun.
Yeah, that's a dart gun. Yeah, that's the only kind of gun we have is a dart gun.
You mentioned there were 4 different subspecies of moose. How much difference is there? Honestly, I went up to Alaska and I saw some really big ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just size. It's geographic. That's really what separates them. But physically, like looking at it, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the shears and an Alaskan eastern moose. They all look the same. It's really just the sheer size. The Alaskan moose are the biggest, size. These ones here, the biggest ones probably that we've seen, like 900 plus pounds. And that, between this bull here in this video and that cow, were probably the 2 biggest moose that we've seen.
Do they all have the light coloration on their hind legs?
Yeah, yep. They all have the lighter stockings, they call them, the white. And depending on the age and the sex, some of them are longer than others, and it's variable.
You comment on their sight, hearing, and scent, what they use most?
Yep. I mean, they have extremely excellent hearing. Their sight is terrible. A lot of times, I have this thing out in my car. I didn't bring it in because I didn't know how many kids are going to be here, but we have this linoleum cutout of a moose antlers that we put on when we're out there goofing around looking for these things. Because if you look at all the videos from up north, they walk around with their arms up in the air like bull moose calling and to attract them. So they have such poor vision, they just see, an obscure thing that looks like antlers and they'll come right over to you. We tried it, we didn't have any success other than looking like a bunch of idiots. It was fun nonetheless. Yeah, and as far as their smell goes, it's superb. So we always, we're downwind of this moose here, and if you get upwind of them, they just walk off. Even when we have them radio collared, you can get close, and you think you're close, and then you just keep walking, and they just keep walking. And obviously they walk much faster than we do, so you have to really get downwind of them.
Can you caution drivers in Connecticut, because I'm aware of moose in this particular area, and I almost got a big bull over in West Hartland by the Feely Farm. The only white on them is their lower extremities and their back legs, and their eyes don't shine. They don't shine like a deer, so you'll never see them until you're right on them.
Yeah, fortunately, because they stand so high, even your high beams have a hard time picking up the height of the eye shine. It's really just, especially this time of year during the spring, May and June, when the young animals are dispersing, and during the fall when the rut's on is when the animals are going to move a lot across different roadways. In the wintertime, you hardly have any moose sightings. And that's mainly because they're hanging out in denser habitat and they don't tend to move as much other than to feed. So really just watch yourself in the spring and the fall.
Do you know the age of the bull moose from the family level?
I mean, you can only put a general class in it. Like this here is probably like either a yearling or a 2-year-old bull, that small one here. And this one over here is probably a 3 or 4-year-old bull, but it's just a guess.
Do they lose them annually?
Yeah, they lose their antlers annually. This set of antlers over here, we picked them up right at the end of January. And the only reason we have this set is because when we captured them, we put transmitters on the antlers and we were able to find them. We kind of cheated. And I believe, and then Jason was going to pay somebody to get the frequencies so the bear guys would get them before we did. And surprisingly, the antlers were only about 70 yards away from each other. They were pretty close by, like from one another.
Do the rodents eat them like they do deer antlers?
Yeah, you probably won't find a better set of moose antlers because we picked them up probably within a day or two from them falling off. So they haven't been out in the weather. They're not weathered or anything. They're really dark and they don't have any, mice activity or rodent activity nibbled on them. This one here, when we were actually looking for the collared bull and seeing if it was with another moose, just a rogue young bull came walking right past us, unfortunately out of range, but we had no expectations of seeing this, and the moose walked right past us. I don't know how well you can see that video. I think we're trying to call to it now to see if it would come back. But I mean, we're just typically like you'd find any hunter, going out there with camouflage on, trying to stay scent free, except for the moose urine that we have. We spray that on once in a while, not on ourselves. Just as an attractant, if anything's in the area, maybe we can draw them in. We're trying all tactics because it's been a challenge to capture these things and put a collar on them.
Do they bed down together or move separate, or are they pretty lonely?
Yeah, like I said, they're pretty individual. I think I lost my battery. They're relatively individualistic, so except during the breeding season, a lot of times they just hang out on their own. But you will see, I think there was a sighting, multiple sightings, some years back of like 7 moose up here in Hartland in the fields. So it's not that they won't hang out, but they don't have like a strong family bond or any communal sense where they need to be social with other animals. So if they run into other animals, they will bed with them, but most of the time you'll find them by themselves, unless it's a cow with a younger calf. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, question?
It's about moose, ask him.
This is where we're calling today. Yeah.
Did you miss them? Someone walked past you?
You'll see it right here. You'll see the moose walk by me in a minute. I didn't miss them, but sometimes the drugs that you use don't always work. And I think because the moose had been so energized by the actual breeding activity from the male, a lot of times that can have an effect on the actual drugs getting absorbed into the system. And within a minute, the male moose that was with this female had moved so far out of range we couldn't even pick it up. So within minutes, it had moved already a mile. I think we just scared the bejeebers out of them, and that was the end of it.
Well, Andy, thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Well, we live in a beautiful area in the state of Connecticut. It's incredible. Before this program started, our board of directors had its annual meeting, and we elected a new director, Sarah Hannafin. I want to welcome you. Sarah, could you stand up, please? We're always looking for new directors, especially young directors. What is your name? Never resist an opportunity, to recruit. We also had elections of officers, and I'd like to introduce our new president. This is my last year as president, and I've been replaced by Sue Murray. Sue, I'd like you to come up here. job as president. You get to pick the winning ticket. Thank you. This is for the moose photo by Gail DiMaggio. And Gail's taken some awesome moose pictures. One of her pictures has a moose photo of moose. It was in our newsletter. For those of you who got the newsletter, walking down Route 20. It reminded me of that movie. Remember that show, Northern Exposure? Yeah. That's what it reminded me of. Okay, and the winner is one of my favorite people of all time, Elaine West. You think it was rigged. You never won anything in your life. Yeah, and now, Cheryl Anderson, would you come up here, please? Our next activity actually will be at the Fireman's Carnival, where we'll have a booth. And this year, the Fireman's Carnival starts a little earlier. It's July 27th or 28th. And last year, for those of you who were at the carnival, you may have remembered our moose board, where the kids could stick their head through the hole, and there's a moose on either side, and there's a bear in the middle. And Cheryl was kind enough to actually design and paint that moose board. And so I have this certificate of appreciation from the Hartland Land Trust, Cheryl. Thank you. And finally, Andy, for your presentation tonight from the Hartland Land Trust. Here's a certificate. You can hang on the wall with all the diplomas you get. I want to take a closer look at what Andy has up here, and then we have some maps, and we have our display. Our big fundraising effort has been the Moose, our Hartland, Your Neighbor Moose t-shirts that we have here. And then on our membership table, there's more information. If you haven't received our newsletter and you would like to, just on a piece of paper, jot it down, or give me a call so I can get you on the list, so that you can get our newsletter. We do a saturation mailing every year to Hartland residents, but I know there's some people here tonight, this evening, not from Hartland, so we may not get our newsletter. We have some extra copies on the table. Please take one. All right. Have some refreshments. Thank you so much for coming this evening.